Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this morning's Job Train How Talent session with our partners and friends, TrustID. So happy that so many of you could join us. In fact, it's a record this morning for the most number of attendees and registrations. So really happy to welcome you on this hopefully sort of sunny Wednesday morning. We are live on Crowdcast and we are also live on LinkedIn. So welcome to everybody on LinkedIn as well as here in Crowdcast. Before I get started with this morning's session, can I just check that everybody can see and hear us okay? If you just pop a little message into the chat, that'd be good. Thank you very much, Alex. That's really helpful. Thanks, Laura. Good. The room's just filling up, so we'll just wait for a few more people to join. Little bit of housekeeping. This is an interactive session. It is for you, so do feel free to get involved, and you can do that in a couple of different ways. You'll see, obviously, it's the chat area, so excuse me. Feel free to ask any questions as we go through, and we will do our best to answer all of your questions as we go through. Secondly, we've actually got a couple of polls running as well. So if you look to the right of your screen, if you're on Crowdcast, you will see a little graph link. If you click on there, we've got a couple of votes coming in already. There's two questions. First is, how confident are you and your team when detecting fraud? And obviously we're talking about pre-employment checks here, new starters. And secondly, do you already use technology to support your right to work checks? So we've got some responses coming back in. So guys, we might come back to that in a minute. And yeah, before we get started, just to explain a little bit about this session. So Job Train, obviously, for those that don't know us, we are an ATS provider working with a really broad cross-section of customers, both across areas like government, local government, care, education, retail, logistics, you name it. But we do work with a lot of employers who have basically compliant-based hiring. And that's one of the reasons why we're here together with TrustID. We work with TrustID integrated into our platform to deliver. You're going to have to forgive me here because we've got a load of petrol leaf blowers right outside the window. So I can barely even hear myself think, so hopefully you can hear me. But yeah, our platform's integrated with TrustID. So today, this session is about essentially looking at how you as employers can stay ahead of identity fraud, strengthen your compliance and streamline right to work checks. The regulatory expectations are tightening right now. So we're going to talk through that. We're going to look at how to detect fraudulent documents and how technology can help mitigate some of those risks as well. So overall, we'll look at the right to work landscape as it is right now in 2026. We'll look at those emerging fraud trends and what that means for you in practice, how digital ID verification works and how it can help to speed up checks for you. And we'll also look at the potential consequences of getting compliance wrong. We're not here to scare you, we're here to offer solutions. And I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by three of the team from TrustID this morning. Should we do some intros? Perhaps starting with you, Sarah. Welcome.
Hello, thank you. So my name's Sarah Croft. I am the Sales and Marketing Director at TrustID. I've been with TrustID for a very long time, probably something like more than 10 years, let's leave it at that. And I look after how we position our products to our customers to give them the very best service and make sure that our products are meeting their compliance needs. And yeah, so that's my background.
Well, thank you very much, Sarah. Sky, good morning. Thanks for joining us.
Morning. So my name is Sky Remnant. I'm the Senior Analyst Manager at TrustID. I've been working at TrustID for 5 years and am the subject matter expert when it comes to identity document validation and right to work legislation. And I also look after a department of 36 analysts, I think we're at the moment. So if the TrustID system cannot sort of process those documents, then it goes through to manual review to someone in our team.
Brill. And finally, last but by no means least, Mark. Good morning.
Good morning, Mark Pedalbury, Business Development Director for TrustID. I'm responsible for supporting our VIP end user accounts and also our partnership, such as JobTrain.
Brilliant, thank you very much. And before we get stuck in, I think we might be starting with you, Sky. We're gonna bring up some slides and things. Don't worry, it's not going to be a death by PowerPoint at all. But some of the slides are really helpful in terms of illustrating some things we're going to be talking through this morning. But I did mention that we had a couple of polls running. So we've got some responses back. Thank you to all of those that have responded. So for everybody here, for the first one, how confident are you and your team when detecting fraud? About 18% are saying not really confident, 63% fairly confident, and just 18%, yeah, I'm all over it, really happy with it. So clearly we've got some work to do here in making sure that everybody comes away feeling far more confident. And the other bit, do you already use technology to support right to work checks? 16% saying yes, 50% yeah for some candidates, and about a third are saying no, they don't. So again, we've got some opportunity here. So Sky, you're going to kick off for us and start talking about, we'll get all the scary stuff out of the way, shall we? So you're going to talk about fraud. So over to you.
Thank you. So since 2023, TrustID has seen a shift when it comes to fraud, and that sort of has changed in alignment with legislation changes, tighter guidance, the digital right to work scheme. So this graph here sort of highlights that the fraud is not disappearing, but it's changing in line with legislation. So in 2022, where we saw biometric resident permit cards not being a sufficient document for right to work anymore, and then the introduction of the digital right to work scheme, we can see that EU documents, which used to be valid for right to work in the UK, have then dropped. And then we see the rise of imposters. So that is when someone has obtained someone's identity document or share code and is trying to pass those validation checks in order to gain right to work, right to rent, whatever sort of service they're trying to gain. Specifically, what we're seeing in TrustID is the rise of share code imposters. The TrustID system has a integration with the Home Office. So when a candidate enters their share code, the integration brings up directly from the Home Office platform that share code. So we know that it's a genuine share code and it's official from the Home Office. And what we see is then someone's obtained those share code details from someone and is trying to pass those facial match checks that we have. And TrustID uses both sort of software facial matching, and we also, as I said, we have a team of 36 analysts which we train on facial matching to ensure that we are checking and analysing those faces, making sure that the share code photo matches that of the selfie uploaded. So yeah, it really just highlights that fraud follows the legislation changes, and it doesn't disappear. They just find new ways of trying to pass those checks. So we used to see the sort of before Brexit, before the digital scheme, EU documents was where we saw sort of counterfeit documents, and now with the introduction of the digital scheme and the BRP is not being valid for right to work anymore, we now see the rise of imposters, and that is continuing into 2025 and 2026.
Can I just a couple of points on that? Thank you, Sky. So just to give you some context, in 2024 we found 650 share code imposters through the process. In 2025 it went down a little bit, but it was still 550 imposters, whereby somebody was using somebody else's share code to obtain work. And one other thing about the integration that TrustID and JobTrain have pulled together, if you are using our service via JobTrain and it is somebody with a time limited share code, the expiry date of the share code is populated within a field in the JobTrain platform. So you'd be able to pull that rather than having to kind of write a note on your HR platform that needs to be monitored.
Brilliant, thanks, Mark. And Sky, I think we'll come on to it in a little bit. You're probably quite surprised actually at you might expect actually to be documents other than UK ones that are subject to quite a lot of fraud, but that's perhaps not going to be the case. But in terms of the specific documents that are being used as almost like as fakes or counterfeits in some way, what does that look like, Alex? I think next slide, please, if possible.
So passport remains and has been the most commonly used counterfeit document, and it tends to then be British and Irish passports, and that's because of the accessibility and what it gives you in terms of right to work, right to rent, and other services as well. So passport sort of remains the most commonly used. However, we are seeing an increase in driving licenses at the moment, and that's because with a driving license, there's not as many sort of software checks that the system can do. With a passport has an MRZ, which is a machine readable zone, and the TrustID software can interpret that data, and there's an algorithm that's embedded within that MRZ. And if it passes or fails, then the system can flag that. However, with the driving license, there is no way of interpreting that data and knowing the algorithm, especially when it's from EU countries outside of sort of British driving licenses. So we're now seeing an increase of those, also with DBS checks as well. And that means that there's more emphasis on TrustID for the sort of analysts to know what security features to look for with these driving licenses. And there's more emphasis on the visual analysis and making sure that we can determine that this Portuguese driving license matches that of a genuine sample. So passports does remain the highest, but we are seeing driving licenses creep up in terms of counterfeit documents.
So in essence, it's quite a lot of onus on us as human beings and as lay people, for want of a better phrase, to try and interpret these documents and try and work out what might be fraudulent versus not, without any grounding, without any proper training or understanding of what to look for. That's quite a lot to take on, and I think you'll probably talk through a few specific examples in a minute, but yeah, that is quite a lot to take on. Just before we move on, Sky, I've got a quick question for you, Mark, from Roz here. Just provide a bit of context to that figure of 550. What's the percentage?
Okay, so I'm not quick enough to work out the percentage. We process about 250,000 checks a month. So it's a small percentage as a total, but then, it's still a thing out there. And I guess the point is that's 550 people that have been prevented from fraudulently getting a job. And obviously, this is not all about kind of trying to scare people here, but I'm sure you're all aware, we'll manage it later, the fines have recently gone up that the government has that kind of impose on employers if they do find fraudulent workers working. So as a total, and I don't know whether we've actually got the figures, but it's something like 650 fakes a year, about 550 share code imposters, and maybe slightly less document imposters, where Mark Pendlebury is using Giles's passport. That's the kind of number that we're seeing on an annual basis.
Sorry, just to tag on to that, what's interesting about the share code imposters as well is we sort of retain some of the data in terms of the share code imposters that we're seeing, and we've seen repeat cases before where you've got the same share code being used by multiple different individuals as well. So it really is where the fraud is happening at the moment. We've seen repeat share codes being used by multiple individuals as well.
Brilliant. I think the next slide will sort of highlight as well the emphasis actually on UK and Ireland documents as well that you use for that.
Yeah. So yeah, British and Irish remains top. As I said, just because of the accessibility and what it can provide. But in 2025, we saw over 50 countries of counterfeit documents, which is the sort of widest range that we've seen at TrustID, and it just shows that the fraudsters are using multiple different documents, and I think it sort of ties in with the driving licenses of trying to find ways to beat the system, whether that's using driving licenses, identity cards. We are seeing with the MRZ algorithm that I mentioned previously, it's quite accessible for someone to get that algorithm correct. So what we're now seeing with the counterfeit documents is often it will pass that algorithm. So it may pass the MRZ checks. However, the TrustID document fraud software will flag it, or one of the analyst team will flag it as visually this is a counterfeit document. So definitely seeing more countries and more sort of widespread fraud when it comes to counterfeit documents.
I wanted to put you on the point here, but Portugal was kind of not a country I would have expected to see on that list, but yeah, it's pretty high.
Yes.
Just looking at that, it looks like it's probably even like a third more than Italy.
Yeah. So this one it's actually specific to one particular client that we have that deals with insurance claims. So we tend to see a lot of Portuguese driving licenses, Italian driving licenses. We had an influx of Polish driving licenses from them. So this is skewed slightly by that one client, but it's EU driving licenses for insurance claims that we've been seeing recently.
And in terms of the next slide and the sort of the types of documents that are digitally altered, but there's quite a significant increase, isn't there?
Yes. So in 2025, with the sort of developments in AI and technology, we have seen this new emerging fraud of what we put under the umbrella of digitally altered documents, which AI is encompassed in that. The same with photoshopping and things like that. We sort of use the umbrella of digitally altered documents because we aren't trained extensively in AI photoshopping. So we put it under that umbrella because we know in some way that document's been digitally altered. This is a new emerging trend, and with the advancements in the speed of AI, it was inevitable that fraudsters were going to use that to their advantage. I think what's most scary about these digitally altered documents is the accessibility of it, because previously with creating a fake document or trying to obtain a fake document, you have to have contact or have accessibility to the materials to be able to do that. So it was quite difficult. Whereas with AI, anybody can access AI and be able to, alter a document or create one. It could be as simple as someone changing their age on their passport, which may not seem that fraudulent, but it's still tampering with someone's genuine document. So the accessibility of it does make it sort of a high risk. And you can see from the graph that we have seen such an increase in these digitally altered documents, and got some examples there on the right hand side of sort of the detection points and what we have trained and teach the analysts in workshops of its lack of sort of depth to the document, lack of shadowing. Sometimes it's too much shadowing. So we're thinking about, okay, so how thick is your driving license? Your passport's a booklet. So how would that, open up in someone's hand and things like that? AI tends to use similar types of backgrounds as well. So we often see wooden tables, carpets, bedding. They tend to use like patterned backgrounds. So we're always on the lookout for those. And in some cases where we're suspicious, but maybe we don't have enough, we'll sort of reject the document and say, please, can you provide this on a different background, just to rule out any potential AI or digitally altered alterations. The analysts have sort of said that these are really highly sophisticated attempts, and they are high quality and would be difficult to sort of spot to the untrained eye. In TrustID, we're constantly doing workshops, training up the analysts to make sure that we're aware of the detection points to look for with these digitally altered documents, alongside having our fraud software as well, the system check.
And just on that, there's probably two or three kind of key points here. So part of the check that we will use for a right to work check or a digital ID check involves the candidate uploading a selfie. And when we're doing that, we're trying to establish liveness, and our software provider is obviously well aware of the threat of AI and digital fraud. So there's a lot of work going on behind the scenes to make sure that the technology we're using is up to date and is able to detect fraudulent applications. So we are looking to make sure it's a real person when we get in that selfie, because that selfie is critical to us then using that selfie to compare and match to the photograph in the person's passport, which is the second area where we're using fraud technology in terms of the document itself. The software that we use to check the document is looking for signs on the document that it may have been tampered, or there's something not quite right with the document. And in those instances, that's when we push it to the document analyst team for a more forensic view and review of the document, which is where we find some of these instances. Additionally, as well as the liveness check on the selfie of the individual, in 2024, we had to, in terms of our digital scheme process, include a document present check. So we're actually checking that the person is using a real document and not a photocopy or a screenshot.
Brilliant. I think the Sky, you've got an example which is a bit more specific, isn't it? We can show an example of a fraudulent document. Alex, thank you.
Yeah, so this is a really interesting case study where it sort of highlights the lengths at which a fraudster will go to try and pass these checks, but also highlights the importance of, as an employer, not sharing details of the TrustID findings in terms of if we have identified it as a counterfeit document, and why not to sort of share those details with the candidate, because then they can sort of use that to then better their counterfeit document. So the British passport on the left hand side. So we received this on the 29th of September for one company, and determined that it was a counterfeit British passport. So we could see this from certain font specifics, certain security features, which we then highlighted on the TrustID report. And that goes back to the employer. And then a couple of days later, we then saw the same individual on a better version of their counterfeit document. And luckily, the sort of details were the same on the passport. And TrustID has an internal watchlist database where we can retain the document number. So if it comes through again for a different company or the same company, it will then flag on our system. But what was interesting is they'd altered the details that we specified were inconsistent on the initial report. So the font specifics were corrected, the security features were better. Just looking at the background of the images as well, they've added a more realistic background. They've added the hand in there to make it look like it is a physical passport, and making it appear more genuine. So this just, it highlights that, fraudsters will try and do everything that they can to better those counterfeit documents, and the importance of not sharing those details with the candidate.
Well, thank you so much, Sky. Sarah, I think you're going to be up next, aren't you? And you're going to talk through, so we've talked about fraud and some of the scary stuff, but we're going to talk about the legislation around right to works today, as in 2026.
Yeah, so it's not quite as exciting and interesting as what Sky had to share. It's always the fraud stuff that people are interested in, but I think I want to just give a bit of there's what do we have, about 4,500 customers, something like that, with TrustID. About 80% of them are relying on us to support their right to work checks. So I just wanted to give a bit of context around what right to work checks mean today, and kind of how the landscape has evolved and changed for employers and indeed our customers. So if we start on the left, everyone on this call, I'm sure, knows that right to work checks are a legal requirement for all employers. So you need to be making right to work checks on everybody that you employ, no matter what their background, nationality, what kind of contract they've got with you, even if they're just working for a week. If you're employing them, you have a legal requirement to make sure that they have the right to work in the UK. And since 2022, we've alluded to it a few times, but in 2022, the Home Office launched a digital scheme for right to work checks. So what that means is that you now have different options depending on the background or the documents, the eligibility documents that your candidates hold. So you can carry out digital checks for holders of in-date British and Irish documents, hence the surge in fraudulent British and Irish documents that we've seen from our base. You can carry out remote checks on those people who would have held a BRP and now have an e-visa, which they share a share code with their employer. And you can also just stick to the non-digital traditional route for everyone else. So if someone has an out-of-date British passport or one of the other eligible documents from List A and List B, as an employer, you can just ask them to come in and show you those documents like you would have done before. So the compliance responsibility remains, and it remains on the employer, but the way that you meet that compliance responsibility has shifted a little bit as the world has moved to a more remote hiring environment post-COVID. Many people don't have physical offices anymore, or if they do, they don't necessarily have an HR team based in that office. They might be recruiting all over the country or internationally. And I think, right to work has had to keep up. But what that means is that there's a certain level of additional complexity in the choice that you make. So if you wanted to go digital, that's for the in-date British and Irish passport holders. You now need to work with somebody that's called a digital verification service, and they need to be certified against the government standards. TrustID are that. And we, in fact, were one of the first to be accredited against that scheme. At the time, we were called IDSPs. We're now called DVSs. It's always good to keep these things complicated. But a DVS basically is an umbrella term for an organization like TrustID who can provide identity verification services. So TrustID was founded 14 years ago, and identity verification has always been at our heart. So we have been providing identity verification services for a multitude of reasons over that period of time. And what that means is that we became certified for the digital scheme, so we can support the digital scheme verification, but we can also offer wider verification for also all of those different methods of right to work that we mentioned. So digital, remote, and non-digital, our technology can support that. So when we asked earlier in the poll whether people were using technology for some, all, or none of their candidates, with TrustID, we have a provision to support the right to work process, no matter how you choose to check your candidates, whether they're eligible for the digital scheme or not. And then Sky's talked a lot about fraud, but I think the other side of things is actually the risk of just not getting compliance right. And I'm sure that the audience will have heard about the increase in enforcement and the news that constantly we hear about people being fined and about enforcement visits. And that's one element of the risk of getting this stuff wrong. So fines have tripled. They were tripled in 2024. So the financial risk of getting it wrong could be up to £60,000 per illegal worker. And indeed, the Home Office and the government have put increased focus on that, and the number of enforcement visits have gone up. So as the visits have gone up, the fines have gone up, and actually, the environment is noisier and has more focus on it. But there's more risk than that, really, for a business in getting this wrong. I think there's a risk around your brand, the trust that you may damage with your customers, your suppliers, other people that might want to come and work for you. And actually, once you've been subjected to an enforcement visit, the focus is a little bit on you, and it's likely that you're going to get other enforcement visits in the future and greater scrutiny from people like HMRC. And it's just a business disruption risk that actually probably I'm sure all the people on this call would not want to undertake. I think the other thing that we don't really talk about on here is that it's not easy. And when we were talking about how confident people feel around fraud, if someone were to walk into your office today with a document that you were suspicious of, it would take a certain level of confidence without relying on technology for your HR manager to be able to say, I think this is suspicious. I don't think this gives you the right to work. I'm not going to give you a job on that basis. And actually using technology, not only does it streamline your process and make sure that you're getting it right every time, but it also gives you that reassurance for your team who aren't fraud experts and may not be 100% right to work experts, that actually you have a service behind the scenes that will support you and demonstrate that you're following due process and protect you should you ever have an enforcement visit against the risk, against the risk of fines. Because if you can demonstrate that you're following the Home Office processes and that you're working with a provider that's giving you every possible guarantee that you're following the process properly, then you're protecting yourself and you're protecting your team. So I think that's really the context that we don't just want to talk about the scary stuff, right? It's not just about the risk of hitting £60,000 fines. It's about protecting your business, protecting your people, and actually making sure that your processes that work behind the scenes are as robust as possible and are actually bringing the right people into your business. I mean, you're investing in these people, right? You're choosing to employ them. You want to make sure that everything about them is right and proper from the beginning.
Yeah, Sarah, that's really helpful. So, I mean, ultimately, what we're saying here is it's sometimes described as the statutory excuse. Yeah. So, as an employee, you really need to show that you are doing all the right things, covering all the bases that you possibly can, to show and demonstrate that you've tried to effectively evaluate whether that person has the right to work, whether they are who they say they are.
Exactly. And if you use a DVS, a certified DVS, so someone like TrustID, for a digital scheme check, so a British and Irish in-date passport holder or Irish passport card holder, then you will have a statutory excuse. Fact. Because we're certified to a standard, that's how it works. But you can use technology like ours to support your process. And it will only reinforce the rest of the process to say, look, we've used technology, we've followed a process, we knew we were compliant by doing this. We then took the additional steps which are outlined in the Home Office guidance around making sure it's the same person turning up for work, for example, that you've actually checked, because there's no point in checking them and then someone completely different coming to work. But if you can, I mean, if I was an employer, I don't think there's a lot of hoops to jump through, but I think I'd want to make sure that I was doing everything I possibly could. And I just think technology gives you that belt and braces that you would need.
Yeah, that's a nice little segue into. We've had a couple of questions in. There's one from Denise here asking, does TrustID offer a face-to-face check option yet? They're currently using Experian, but they'd rather use TrustID because we've got an integration into JobTrain.
So I thought sorry, Sarah, I thought I'd answer that as part of my next bit. Is that okay? Is that?
Yeah, but I mean, so there's a second part as well. We might come on to, today's conversation isn't so much focused on DBS, but DBS is also offered as well. Probably point in terms of PVG Disclosure Scotland. So Scotland hasn't moved quite as quickly in terms of offering an online service as England. It is happening, but it isn't as widely available. Is that about right?
Yeah, so for Disclosure Scotland and also for Access Northern Ireland, Access NI, neither of those organisations have got an API that we could integrate into as a DBS supplier. We do have some customers. We've got sister company UCheck, who are the biggest DBS supplier in the UK, and they do have a solution for organisations who want to carry out PVG checks in Scotland and also in Access NI checks, but they are very manual and they pretty much replicate what you would need to do as an employer. So we can do it as a managed service, but there's not an awful lot of automation in that process. Would just be basically copying what you do and charging you for it. So it's probably not and at the moment, Scotland don't seem to be engaging in terms of wanting to do things differently, unlike DBS for England and Wales.
Well, Mark, thank you very much. I think you're up next actually now. So since you're chatting already,
so yeah,
Should we cover
I think
the next section, which is about DBS and how it streamlines that process?
Yeah, and I think Sarah's covered quite a lot of the points here already. I think maybe, and answering that question that Denise was offering. So we do support a broad range of right to work checks. We also support ID validation for DBS. So whether you're doing a right to work check or a DBS check, ID is critical to both of those. And for DBS, you can and right to work, you can opt to do that right to work check or ID check for DBS face to face, where you need the candidate to get on a bus, get in a train, get in a car, come to the office with their right to work or DBS ID documents. You need somebody who's competent to understand whether they're using the right documents in terms of right to work eligibility or following DBS guidelines. There's typically 3 different identity documents. You need to photocopy those. You need to make sure that the person in front of you matches the details. If it's a photo ID, and if it's age related, you need to check that the date of birth looks consistent with that individual. Then you need to make a photocopy of those documents and keep those documents on file. Now, as it happens, TrustID started its life in terms of right to work, supporting a lot of hospitality organizations who actually carry out the right to work checks face to face at the same time as the interview. So absolutely, Denise, we do offer and support organizations who want to do a face to face right to work check. That particular service isn't available specifically in the job training integration. However, we could give you direct login details into the TrustID platform that runs alongside JobTrain, and you'd be able to use that, log in directly, and either use a phone or a tablet to take a photograph of those right to work documents, send them to TrustID. TrustID will validate that they are eligible in terms of following Home Office guidelines and give you a right to work report. So you can absolutely do that. So you can use technology to support face-to-face checks. In terms of the specific right to work service that is available in JobTrain as a standalone right to work service, what we will do, that will go out via an email. The candidate will have a link in the email. They click on the link and they're in TrustID's platform. Pretty much any document that candidate has got that can be used for right to work is available for the candidate to use. So we've got UK and Irish passports, Irish passport cards, share codes, birth certificates, overseas passports. Whatever the document is chosen by the candidate to use, the process is intuitive. And what I mean by that, if more than one document is needed, like a birth certificate, an overseas passport, where you need to upload a second or third document to support the right to work check, the workflow will support that. So they'll upload whatever document they've got, then they'll take a selfie, and then the process is finished. And at that stage, all the information is sent to TrustID's platform. And where we can, we'll try and validate the right to work eligibility and ID validation in our cloud. And high percentage of time we can do, 60-70% of the time we can give you a result within minutes, because we can do that in our platform. Where we can't validate and get a result with using technology, perhaps it's a blurred image of the document, or the selfie match between them and the person in the photo doesn't meet our minimum threshold, or they're using a document that just can't be read using technology, like a birth certificate. Those checks will go through to Sky's team, and Sky's team will use real people between 8 in the morning and midnight every day of the year, and that team will take a manual review of the check details. And we will send the employer back one of 3 reports. If somebody is able to use an in-date UK or Irish passport because they are a UK or Irish national, and everything passes, as Sarah mentioned, we'll give you a digital scheme right to work report. What that means is that the only follow-up you need to do. You don't need to see the person, you don't need to see the documents, but you need to do an imposter check on day one to make sure that the person turning up for work matches the person in the TrustID report. If you do that, you'll get your statutory excuse. If somebody uses a share code, and I mentioned before, we do about just under 250,000 checks a month. I would say 85 to 90% of the candidates which we see will be eligible for a right to work check that is completely remote. So the other option for a completely remote check is using share codes. So as Sky mentioned before, we've got an interface with the Home Office share code platform. So in our workflow, we ask them the date of birth, they put in their 9-digit share code number. We ask them whether they're working in the UK under a student visa. If they are, they're asked to upload term time information, and we or Sky's team will vet that to make sure it complies with Home Office rules. Then they take a selfie, which is the one that we compare with the Home Office photograph looking for imposters. And we will then bring back in the JobTrain platform a right to work report, which includes the share code report from the Home Office, document 1. Document 2 is an imposter check where we show you the candidate's photograph and the photograph from the Home Office database, and we'll confirm that that is the same person or not. And then the third page is the right to work eligibility page. And this is where we confirm whether the individual has got continuous or time limited right to work. If there are any restrictions, we'll confirm those. So for instance, if it's somebody working in the UK under a student visa, we'll confirm the maximum number of hours they can work per week, and we'll include in the PDF report the specific term time information that's been updated. With that segment of candidates, again, providing you adhere to any restrictions that are in the share code report, your only obligation as the employer is to do an imposter check on day one. Again, this can be done remotely, as with UK and Irish nationals, or face-to-face, and you just check that the individual turning up for work matches the person in the TrustID report. If somebody has got an expired UK passport, hasn't got a passport at all, and therefore using birth certificate, proof of national insurance, or an overseas passport with a sticky visa, we'll still confirm what right to work status they have, so you as the employer can make an offer. However, to comply with Home Office guidelines, you are still required to see that individual with their original documents before that individual starts work and signs a contract of employment. So you can make an offer, and you can use the TrustID report to support that you've done an authentication check on the document. But that 10-15% of the population, unfortunately, that can't go through a fully automated report, you will need an unhappy path, which means you need to see that individual. Probably that's maybe wanting a bit long there. Does that kind of answer the questions that were asked there?
Yeah, it's really comprehensive. I'm sat here sort of absorbing all, thinking, actually it's blown my mind a little bit, because there's all these different iterations. I think you think of right to work and you by default think of, a UK passport, maybe a driving license, but then obviously you've got to cater for everybody else, people that don't have those documents to hand, because not everybody has a driving license or a passport. There's just quite a lot to consider and quite a lot to take on board. I think the next slide is quite helpful in terms of understanding where technology helps, yeah, and also, in the nice possible way, the potential fallibility of humans or the risks around that as well.
Yeah, so I think I mentioned some of this before, but maybe just go on to this. So the technology we use is what we're trying to do here is validate the document, because in most cases it's the document that gives you, if we're talking right to work, eligibility. And then what we want to do is verify that the person carrying out the check is the rightful holder of that document. And if we can, then we can give you a right to work status outcome. So we use a range of different technologies. If we're doing a remote check via an email guest link, we use, as Sky and Sarah have mentioned, a range of technologies to verify the document. So a range of different security features in different documents, we're checking those. We're checking the document against the UK Police fraudulent document database called the Amber Hill database. So any documents that have been seized across the UK as a result of any form of criminal activity, those details go on something called the Amber Hill database, and TrustID has got an information share agreement with the UK Police to check against that document. So we check the document details. We check that it's a real document and not a photocopy or screenshot. And then we probably a few other checks we do on the document again, depending on the document type. Then we also then ask the candidate to take a selfie. And two things we're doing there. First of all, we're checking it's a real person. And we're also then using that selfie to compare and match against that individual's document. So I see there's a question again from Denise about that. So if you're doing a remote check, whether it's expired or not expired, we'll always give you a face match between the selfie and the document that the individual has used to prove right to work or digital ID check for DBS. There is document fraud software. So the document verification software that we use includes software that are looking for fraud signals. So we can, it's looking to see whether the document has maybe been tampered with. It's looking for certain security features in the documents and will flag. And that's, if it does flag, it will go for human review. And just to talk about the technology, and there's a couple of improvements we've made over the last couple of years. Firstly, in terms of the document upload process, you're probably aware, if you're doing a remote check, you need to use a mobile device, a phone or a tablet. And you need that because we need a high quality photograph of the document that we're going to validate. So that's why we're asking candidates to use a mobile device. And when they come to take a photograph of the document, we do give some hints and tips about what to make sure that they're uploaded a decent image for us to be able to validate. When they've taken the photograph of the document, they are shown on the phone or the tablet what that image looks like. And they can opt to use that or retake the photograph if they say, oh, I've missed half the document off. If they opt to use it, we don't accept that document straight away. That image is sent to our server, our platform, and the candidate will just see a little whirring wheel going around. And that's when we're just checking to make sure that is something we can validate. Now, it's not perfect. It can't tell the difference between a driving license and a passport, or it can't tell that someone's using a BRP and they shouldn't be. But it can check, is there a photograph there? Is there an MLZ there? And that has significantly increased the overall success rate. And if we can't validate it, if we're saying that, no, we can't see what we need to see, the candidate's going to be asked, oops, something went wrong. Can you try this again? And they're given some hints and tips. And we do that 3 times. And after the 3rd image, we'll just grab whatever they've taken and we'll try and validate it.
And this is where Sky's team kicks in, and then they do with the human experts get their eyes on it as well.
Right. And then with the liveness check or with the selfie check, we do a similar thing. We do a liveness check, what we call on the fly. So the software is trying to find the face and establish that it's a 3D image and it's a real person. And if we can't do it, again, the candidate will get a message. They'll see the image that they've just taken, and on the right-hand side, they'll see what we're trying to achieve in terms of what we need when we're taking a selfie. And we do that 5 times, and the overall success rate for liveness now is, 95 to 97% success. So 95 to 97% of the time, we are getting individuals having a successful liveness check because we are doing that check. And then in terms of the human team, so as I mentioned before, typically they will get involved 2 reasons. A, the technology hasn't been able to make a firm decision on whether the document is valid or not, in which case it goes for human review. And there are certain things that Sky's team can override. There are certain things we can't make a decision on. So if liveness fails or document present fails, we weren't there when the candidate was taking the photograph, so we cannot override those decisions. But if the face match is not meeting our maximum or minimum threshold between Mark Pendlebury and the photograph and the document, then Sky's team can, normally two people, will look and establish that that is the same person or not, and maybe it's a document imposter. So we can, where the technology isn't working as it should do, or where it can't make a decision, Sky's team will get involved, or when it's a document that just cannot be read via technology. So term time information, birth certificates, proof of national insurance. Those are the situations where the document analyst team would get involved.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Mark. I guess as we start to think about wrapping up, I think we've got some information we can share about the right to work landscape as it is right now, but also what's likely to change in the future as well in terms of some of the trends as well. Alex, if you could bring that up, perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you. It's quite hard to read on that, so I don't know if Mark just wanted to talk through just in headline terms.
Yeah, there's a couple of things. I think one key one is the Home Office went out to the market back end of last year. There are some concerns that in certain parts of the UK economy, the right to work rules aren't as clear as they could be. So in the gig economy with self-employed individuals, if you've got Mark Pendlebury working for a subcontractor on a building site, who's responsible for the right to work check, the main contractor or the subby? If I'm self-employed, who's responsible for right to work? And we know that the government is going to come back out to the market and advise and provide rules and regulations to try and tighten up right to work guidelines in that particular area. We absolutely know from the data Sky shared that the bad guys will continue to invest technology in AI to try and fool employers and technology. So we need to be on our game and making sure that our third-party suppliers are equally on our game and investing in technology to make sure we can identify those. I think it's, the government hasn't got limitless resources for enforcement. So I think we are going to see more targeted enforcement into particular areas. And obviously that's a big political hot potato at the moment. So I think there's going to be continued focus on enforcing right to work rules in certain areas. And I think the conversation on digital identity documents and reusable digital identity documents will continue. You're probably aware that there was a change that the government wanted to bring in this current parliament related to reusable digital IDs, which seems to have gone away now. But I imagine that story will still continue. So there are going to be a number of changes, but I think the key one is that change related to the kind of gig economy and self-employed.
Thanks, Mark. We've got a couple of questions actually. Alex, here, perhaps you can take the slide down. There we are. I can see all now. First question: is there still a risk in the right to work checks if a non-British or Irish passport holder provides a share code?
Sarah, do you want?
Very much so. I think that's the conversation we were having with Sky about imposters. So if you think about a share code, it's a much easier thing to obtain than a fraudulently produced document. And as Sky was saying, we do see a number of share codes every week that are legitimate share codes, but are being presented by somebody who isn't actually the rightful holder of that share code. Now, whether those share codes are being sold, stolen, who knows? But I think the risk is that you might become complacent when checking a share code because someone gives you something that is legitimate and they share that with their date of birth and it comes back as, it's a genuine share code. But I think the bigger risk is just making sure that it actually does belong to the person who's presenting it. And also, I think, it's just not being complacent that just because they've got a share code, it means that they're going to be okay. The same as just because they've got a British document doesn't mean you shouldn't check it thoroughly. It's the same risk.
Thanks, Sarah. And then a final question is probably more about imposter checks. And this is from Sophie. You actually use TrustID at the moment. But what counts as a valid imposter check on day one? And does that need to be logged in some way?
Sky, I don't know if you want to take that. It doesn't have to be logged. So the guidance says that you have to do it, but it doesn't specify how you have to do it. And so I think across our customer base, the way that people do it varies enormously. And bear in mind that the person making the imposter check might not be in your HR team. So the person, that could be the manager that's employed that person. And many of our customers would then share the TrustID reports to that manager. And then they would just physically look and go, yeah, you look like the same person. I think, it's a challenge because you really only need to rely on evidencing that you've done the imposter check if you were to have a problem. And if you've done the imposter check, really you shouldn't be having a problem. So you've done the report and you can prove that the person who's turned up on the day is that person. But yeah, it's a bit of an anomaly really that the Home Office guidance says do it, but it doesn't say that you're required to record it or indeed how you should do it.
Yeah, it's exactly as you said, Sarah, that it doesn't specify that it needs to be logged in any way. It just needs to be done. I think from a compliance perspective, it's probably best practice to have a log of it being done, but it's not as a requirement per the Home Office guidance. As long as it's done, then you're compliant then with the requirements.
And just to add, some organisations, because we're often asked why ATSs may not have something, maybe like a tick box, but it's actually your HR platform that needs to keep that information. So some organisations have spoken to their HR platform provider and asked against each employee, because obviously they're now an employee, that there's some form of tick box that allows the employer to tick that they've done that imposter check on day one, which they can then share with from an audit perspective if they're ever investigated.
Yeah, it's a good point, Mark, because from an ATS or a job training point of view, we, as part of the integration, obviously you can instigate the checks, whether it's right to work ID verification or DBS, all that can be initiated from the job training platform. Those checks are then completed by TrustID, and the reports and results come automatically back into the job training platform. But those day one checks are done when that person has essentially been employed, and they're probably already on your HR system at that point. So it's about that. I think Denise is just saying, yeah, we normally get our managers to sign and date the right to work checklist on day one, and then they save it in their HR file. So that's one way of doing it. Yonette says, is it okay to do an in-person right to work check for British passport holders, sign the original copy and then save it on file?
Yes.
Absolutely. And I mean, that's the thing, as an employer, you have a choice. You don't have to use digital checks. You can ask people to come to the office. It's completely up to you. That option very much still exists.
Yeah, and Ross makes a very good point as well. It's important that managers get some training so they've got some confidence on how to read a face and match a photo as well. I mean, there are so many considerations here, and that some of it's quite scary. Fraud is on the rise, definitely. There are significant penalties about it, but there are some really, really solid solutions in place. Obviously, TrustID, because you guys are on the call today, both in terms of digitally, but by having experts to back that up in the form of a human team like Sky's are. And it's a really inexpensive process to go through versus potential penalties. I mean, just in terms of providing protection and peace of mind that you've got that statutory excuse, that you're doing the right things, that if you were to be challenged at any point, you have the evidence to back up the process you've gone through in terms of making sure that the person is who they say they are and they do have a right to work as well. Samantha, funny that we are globally. Is your service for UK-based candidates only, or can you check candidates based overseas?
It depends if who's the employee. If the employer is wanting to do a right to work check for UK employment, yes, we can do it. It can be based anywhere in the world because you can just send an email and the candidate can do it there. or if it's for employment overseas. The only other country we support in terms of right to work eligibility is the Republic of Ireland. So I don't know whether that answers the question.
But that said, we can validate identity documents
exactly.
from, like, I think we've got 16,000 global identity documents that we can validate through our service. So we can validate the document to confirm that it is a genuine, assessed as a genuine document. And we can check that it is being presented by the person who rightfully owns it. The piece we can't do is the eligibility piece. So we couldn't then give you the eligibility of whether that document gave someone the right to work in France or Spain. We don't do that part, but we can definitely do the counter fraud check to make sure that the documents you're seeing are genuine.
Brill, thank you, Sarah. And we've reached the top of the hour. The hour's gone really quickly.
Yeah.
Sky, Mark, Sarah, thank you so much for your time. Thanks for sharing so much information, hopefully giving everybody a lot more confidence going forwards. And thank you to you all for joining us for this morning. I really hope you got some value from it. If you go for up in the chat, there's links to link in with Mark, with Sarah, with Sky, with me. If you're a job training customer, you've got more questions, by all means, get in touch with us or your account manager. We'd be only too pleased to help. But hope you have a really good rest of your day, good rest of the week, and a very happy Easter for next week. We will be back soon, but in the meantime, thanks for your time, and see you again soon.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.